as we're going through such a difficult time, with the assumption that it will get more difficult, what are you kind of feeling like are some of the biggest blind spots or worry spots for you that maybe people could be bringing a little more attention to?
One of the biggest ones that comes to mind immediately is actually these societal and group processes of polarization and shadow projection. Trying
Shadow
to
projection. Mm.
yeah, trying to default to going back and doubling down on our oversimplified assumptions about life and about right and wrong and how things work as a way to protect our sense of self, our meaning, our sense of belonging with certain groups, and really ignore the complexity and nuance of life. And that's a big concern to me because a shadow projection, is that something that you've talked about in your podcast recently
No, why don't
by
you
chance?
define it for the listeners right now?
Yeah. So the shadow is defined by Jung as the parts of ourself and our experience that's either ignored, but more often than not, very much viewed as wrong or bad, unwanted, it's undervalued. And in internal family systems therapy, this is referred to as the exile parts sometimes. So it's the stuff that we don't like about ourselves, we don't want to admit. It's often unconscious. And the default is to project the shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't like, onto other people. So this is why we can always give advice to others. We can always see the shadow or the negative parts of someone's character very easily when we have trouble seeing that about ourselves. The shadow is also a metaphor. It's, when light as consciousness or conscious awareness is put on something, it casts a shadow. So that's what we don't see that's behind it. And certainly when a light's being shown on us, when we think about ourselves, we have a shadow that we don't see. So the projection is the default for pretty much all of us. And the first stage, and it's not really stage, but first real component of this lifelong growth process called individuation that Jung pointed out, is really confronting our shadows and trying to retract those projections onto other people. So if I see someone, example probably help, if I see someone who I think is really arrogant, right? Someone who's like really self assured and they're out there, maybe kind of a narcissistic personality, and that's what triggers me the most emotionally, that I get most upset about, then that's an opportunity to kind of check, well, how can I feel that same level of arrogance sometimes? What are things that I feel maybe overconfident about? Like, these are difficult questions. When you're really doing shadow work, you're asking yourself things that will make you uncomfortable. That's how you know you're getting closer to that area. But that's an essential part of this growth process, and to start retracting these projections onto others, because that can be incredibly destructive in relationships, both our personal relationships and like communities interacting with other communities. So, that's kind of the background on why polarization is concerning to me, because I think in these difficult times, we absolutely need to find a way to move through the fear that's natural, the anxiety that's natural, without kind of becoming more destructive personally and collectively.
So, what is it? Is it something you feel is sort of this natural thing that's going on based on people's trauma, or it's human nature? I mean, what can we do to not just reduce our own shadow projection, but also to deal with it coming at us?
Yeah. I really think this is where cultivating compassion plays a huge role. Compassion for ourselves to be able to do this harder work, and compassion for other people, because that's a necessary part of having dialogue, being in community, being in relationship. Compassion, is another thing that can be very abstract, but that may mean doing compassion meditations as a way of practicing this attitude, and this willingness to recognize our own suffering, the suffering of others, which isn't always expressed in sadness or tears, right? It can be expressed in anger. it can be expressed in frustration and avoidance and things that we kind of have to decode just to bear witness to some of the suffering that's happening in the world. That's very hard but essential work. But I think that's why I see compassion, and I write about this. So I think that's a huge part of this process of healing, because we don't really get rid of our shadows. Shadow work doesn't end. Like we're just too complex as individuals, or too complex as cultures and societies. But we can learn to face them, to reconcile some of that, and make more conscious choices about how we want to be and where we want to go.
Well, if anything, it's probably useful to try to be able to spot it in essence, because maybe you can take things a little less personally, or try to understand the motivations of different folks out there, because opinions are like, it's challenging because we live in a time when you're being forced to make some pretty clear-cut decisions, medically, or to do with the pandemic, or uh, and in that way, it can kind of lean you into certain camps, or this tribalism can start to increase, and that polarization. So, like, it's a tricky, just like a minefield of trying to like keep your head on straight and feel like you're not in a reactive mode, but
Mm-hmm.
you're still able to live life. I don't know, man. It's a difficult, playing field right now. Um,
It is. And we need to pace ourselves and take breaks, because that rushing and trying to do things quickly, that's how we can, not give due attention to the shadow and to the complexities of life.
mm.
It's difficult, but these are the times that we live in. We I think hopefully can rise up to the occasion, because that's what's being called for. That's what we need. And certainly our ancestors have gone through many shares of their own very challenging times, but we don't choose the times that we live in. Well, some people think we do, but we're here, and this is the impact that we can have.
So, of the different psychedelic therapies sort of coming online, which ones are you the most excited about, or do you think have the most promise for real effectiveness in the world?
I think MDMA is one that is going to probably have a fairly consistent impact on people, because the range of experiences, although they're very diverse still, is narrow enough that it can have specific clinical indicators like trauma. So I think that has a lot of promise. The research has been showing that. So we still have to do this translation from our controlled research studies to the everyday world, which is always a difficult translation. But I think that's one that's very promising. Psilocybin, kind of the classic psychedelics, but psilocybin in particular, is one that is my primary area of interest and focus. And being mentored by Bill Richards, we were a great match, because I have a lot of interest in existential anxiety, which can come up at end of life and with cancer related dysphoria and anxiety, but certainly can come up for all of us at any point, confronting questions about our own mortality and loss. Sense of loneliness is so common. It's become increasingly common. And fears about being controlled by others, social control, like, and social responsibility, as well as meaning, personal meaning, and this fear, or belief in absolute meaninglessness of the cosmos. Like, these are big questions, and these things can come up in various ways in psychedelic journeys. But the classic psychedelics, I think that's even a bigger range of possible outcomes, but is one that, in the right context, with the right care and safety, has a potential role to help kind of shake up our minds and allow new ways of thinking, a sense of wonder and awe, a tolerance of this ambiguity and not knowing, that I think is so powerful to create some more flexibility in how we approach and adapt to life. I mean, that's part of creativity too, right? And so that's how I see these things connected.
A tolerance for ambiguity. I mean, talk about like a good medicine for life today. I suppose it's always like that, where life is kind of ambiguous. But I think beforehand we thought it was a bit more concrete, or we had our own illusions about how, like, well, it's usually like this, and I'm expecting this, and then that, and that's really upended. Uh, what are ways we can increase our tolerance to ambiguity? Tolerance implies like that's not such a good thing. Like, oh, how much can I take? But sort of like, maybe are there ways that we can find a positive polarity? Our viewpoint could shift about
Hmm.
ambiguity.
Hmm. Yeah, I default to the phrase tolerance of ambiguity because that's how it's described in the research literature. And it's, primarily a personality trait. So some of this is just embedded within our personalities. There's a genetic impact of this, but we can all work on, making ourselves relatively more tolerant, or even, as you're suggesting, embracing ambiguity. And I think that's a healthy thing because that's just how it is, and it's how it is from our limited human understanding and perspective always, as we're trying to make sense of reality and navigate the world through that sense of groundedness and understanding. But our stories about reality, our assumptions are never going to be reality. Just like our perceptions are not really, accurate to everything out there. So knowing that is one of the most important steps, right? To recognize that while we still try to create this evolving working model of how the world works and how we work as individuals, how our relationships work, knowing that things change, things are constantly shifting and in movement. And that really hasn't changed. We just have this
No,
pandemic going on as one thing that's letting us know, oh, yeah, this is how the world works. And
yeah,
so I think we just have to confront those things, and then we can find ways to bring some of this embracing attitude, this joy, this acceptance of all that is, even if it's different or not ideal, and then find moments of joy and fun and connection in that milieu of everything.
absolutely. I mean, kind of practicing meditation where you're just breathing in and it's radical acceptance, and bringing that into your body and into your heart, of just feeling like not pushing something, but just sort of allowing it to flow through the great what is. Um, I think, as my friend Michael Robinson once said, he called it Plan B, but like BE, like the word B, and
Yeah.
it's just what is.
Yeah.
Plan B. Um, yeah. So, are you personally feeling hopeful? If you're in the trenches working with people and seeing what they're going through and the progress they're making or not making amidst like this renaissance, as it's called, in the psychedelic therapy.
Yeah.
What's your honest assessment of, like, are we going to make it, Kyle? No, I mean,
Yes, my honest assessment. Yeah, you know, there's. I'll say one thing. When I've written this book, I do like these talks and podcasts and stuff. I have that side, um, and that's very meaningful work for me. But what's the core of my meaning is really working one on one with people in a deep way, and as a therapist. And I just really love that. And that, and in my personal relationships with people, that's where I have hope. It's never from reading the news or a research article. It's actually seeing the impact in people's lives of various things, and including psychotherapy. So I have a lot of hope in individuals. For people who are wanting to heal, people who are wanting to grow, um, communities, cultures that are really confronting these complex issues and are really trying to problem solve, not just give oversimplified answers to some of these complex questions, and face this what is kind of um, attitude about life, and accepting the things that we don't know, and including the things that we know that we don't want to be the case. I think the hope I have is in the individuals and kind of this long game of humanity, because we've been through a lot of crap historically, and we don't even know all of it. Like our just Homo sapiens, we've been around. One of the estimates about 500,000 years, and our written records go back maybe 6,000 at most, and that's highly partial. And just what we know, just how many things that we've gone through, uh, there's this sense of resilience and that creative problem solving that I think has helped us through. So I have hope in that. I do think, yeah, things are going to get rough, and they've been rough. Like we don't have to, doomsday scroll or predict about the future, but we have the ability, and we've had the ability to kind of wake up and make some changes. Did you see that movie Don't Look Up?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah.
It really was, and very
Yeah.
sad, but I love bringing humor to it. I think that's part of resilience and being able to recharge ourselves as we confront some of these issues.
Well, I agree that we're resilient and humans are resilient, but I think my concern is like that we're just continuing this wheel of trauma or perhaps making it worse. I mean, I'm really interested in, can we harness the moment to grow? Is there a kind of leap that can be made to not repeat the same patterns? Because our history, while we've gone through some external circumstances or otherwise that have been rough, we've also done some really shitty things to each
Yes.
other that I think we'd hope that we can grow as a species and say, hey, we don't want to do that anymore. Or maybe the death penalty isn't like our thing, among others. So that's, to me, the real prize. Is like, I
Hmm.
do believe too, is like, well, I mean, we'll kind of do whatever we need to do to get through. Yeah, we are very adaptable. But can we somehow like find the silver lining there or thrive in such a way that we do better than we've done before? And not only that, like
Yeah.
and that's perhaps some of the promise of psychedelic therapy. Maybe that's why it's coming more to the fore now, is that it's giving us an opportunity to move faster and deeper in ways that we just didn't have before. Didn't have that language, I'm sure, in the Middle Ages, or more than likely. And I'm hoping that's a form of progress.
I hope so too. And there are many ways that this won't go as well as we'd hope or we initially thought, right? The
Well, you
shadow
mean
side
right now
again.
it's not going as well as we had hoped? This is exactly what I wanted. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's this disillusionment that I think is part of the process of living, and the excitement about these innovative practices and tools, innovative for us in the West. And, they're out of this place of suffering and pain. There can be what I call this like magic bullet transference onto any new thing, any new innovation. Psychedelics absolutely are powerful. Um, and they're not always healing or transformative in the ways that we read about or hear about or learn from the research studies or from our friends. And even when they're powerful experiences, they're not always integrated in a way that actually impacts our lives, our relationships, our society. Right? That there's hard work that's part of this. Nothing's automatic. And I think that's one of the things that I really like to bring forward. It's great when we have therapy. I love being able to do my long-term therapy depth work with people, but that's not accessible to most people, right?
Yeah.
So we need a variety of options and tools and ways to support people, right? And to make it accessible financially, but also across different kind of worldviews and cultural perspectives. And there's a lot of hard work ahead, and I think the sense of rushing, because we think this is going to help more people as quickly as possible, we can get into more trouble when
Hmm.
we have that attitude, if we're not really paying attention and thinking through some of these ethical quandaries.
Hard work takes time. Yes.